The air was thick with silence as the figure stepped into the forgotten chapel, its floorboards groaning beneath every footstep. Dust danced in the shafts of moonlight, each particle carrying whispers of sermons long since swallowed by time. The altar still bore the shape of something sacred, though now draped in rot and shadow. At the center, a chalice of silver pulsed faintly, as if remembering blood once poured within. Mirrors lined the walls, all cracked, all reflecting not the room but the figure itself in poses it hadn't yet assumed. Something watched from the rafters, unseen, but present, like breath on the nape of a neck. As the wind stirred the ruined velvet banners, a low hum rose from beneath the floor, growing into a mournful hymn. The figure approached the chalice, eyes never blinking, and placed a key into the bowl. The chapel exhaled, and the mirrors cleared. Now they showed memories, regrets, and the figure wept, for none were its own. It had come seeking answers. It had found a name, and the name had found it back. The door behind closed with finality. The ceremony had begun. Yet nothing screamed. No lights flickered. Just the sound of soft chanting from empty pews. A bell tolled in the distance, though there was no tower. Time thickened. The walls closed in like lungs holding a breath. In the mirror, the figure no longer blinked. It now stood still, open-eyed, with arms outstretched like a marionette waiting for strings. A figure stepped out from behind the altar, identical in every feature but bathed in shadow. No mouth, just eyes. They nodded, and the figure in the mirror followed suit. The chalice overflowed with a dark, syrupy liquid, and each drop that touched the floor sizzled and formed runes. The hymn grew louder. And then, silence again. The air snapped. All movement ceased. In the chapel, only one figure remained. It left by the front doors, walking backward into the fog. The mirrors no longer reflected anything at all. The storm had followed Mara for days, its clouds an unnatural shade of gray, low and brooding like a predator waiting to pounce. When she reached the old and nestled between two leafless hills, it welcomed her not with warmth but with a groaning door that opened before she touched it. The innkeeper was not behind the desk. The register signed itself with her name in flowing black ink. Room 13 was at the end of a crooked hall, the only room with its number missing, though the door whispered it aloud when she approached. Inside, the fireplace crackled with no wood, the bed turned down as if expecting her. She slept poorly, her dreams looping through corridors she had never walked, chased by echoes of her own voice calling for help. In the morning, her clothes were already laid out, pressed and folded, despite having packed nothing. The inn offered no food, yet she never felt hunger. Other guests appeared only in glimpses. Reflections in dusty mirrors, shadows slipping behind half-closed doors. They stared with empty eyes, mouths sewn shut by invisible thread. On the third night, she found the stairwell to the basement, which hadn't existed before. Drawn by an urge that pulsed behind her ribs, she descended, each step softer than the last, until she was walking on mist instead of wood. The basement opened into an impossibly vast ballroom lit by chandeliers of bone. 1,000 figures danced slowly in silence, blindfolded, their movements precise yet hollow. One by one, they turned to her, still dancing. In their center stood the innkeeper, a man with no face and too many hands. He beckoned, and Mara joined the dance. She moved as if remembering steps she never learned. Her limbs knew the rhythm, her mouth opened, but no sound escaped. The dance grew faster, wilder, until the floor gave way and the dancers floated, spinning in the void. Mara tried to scream but inhaled silence. When she woke, her room was gone. Only the ballroom remained. The guests now stood still, watching her. The faceless man held a silver tray. On it, a key and a mirror. She took the mirror. It showed the inn, behind her. And herself, vanishing. She turned around, but there was only fog. Elia had never believed in haunted trains until the night he boarded the 303 northbound, the one with no schedule, no listed stops, and no record of arrival. He hadn't meant to find it. The station had appeared at the end of an alley he didn't remember turning into, its iron arch reading, "Terminus," in faded gold paint. The platform was empty save for a single lamplight and the long, silver train idling in complete silence. The doors opened as he approached, revealing a velvet interior untouched by time. No conductor. No passengers. Just rows of seats and a scent like dried roses and burnt copper. He chose the middle car and sat by a window that showed only blackness outside. The train began moving soundlessly, the world outside remaining still. Minutes passed. Then hours. Then, different hours. The clock on his wrist spun wildly. Shadows stretched and folded across the floor in patterns that didn't match the light. Occasionally, the speaker above him crackled with static and a voice reciting names he didn't recognize, in languages he didn't speak. At each name, one seat would be filled, silently, by a figure that hadn't been there before. Some wore tattered suits, others old uniforms or robes. All had their heads bowed. None breathed. Elia moved to another car. The windows now showed places from his childhood, his old school, the hospital where his mother died, the house he burned down. But they were wrong. The windows showed them empty, ruined, sunken in time. At the end of the final car was a locked glass case holding a conductor's cap, a blood-stained timetable, and a mirror. His reflection looked older, tired, then smiled. He didn't. The intercom blared, "Final destination." The train slowed, revealing a platform of crumbling stone and open sky. The stars moved like living things. The passengers stood as one and walked off, dissolving into dust as they stepped into the air. Elijah remained. The train began reversing. Alone again. Except now, his seat had a plaque, "Occupied, conductor pending." The cap was gone. The mirror showed no reflection. Just a seat. Waiting. The forest of amber pines was not on any modern map, though locals spoke of it in hushed tones, as if uttering its name too loudly might summon something from its roots. Clara found it by accident, or so she thought, while driving alone after taking a wrong exit on a road trip she didn't remember planning. The trees were tall, unnaturally so, their trunks too smooth, their branches too symmetrical, like they had grown according to a blueprint rather than nature. As she ventured deeper, following an unmarked trail, she noticed how sound changed. No birds, no breeze, just a muffled hum, like a crowd whispering behind a wall. Her phone displayed no signal, no time, no battery icon, just a single blinking dot on a blank screen. The trail led her to a clearing where 12 stones stood in a circle, each etched with a different symbol. In the center, a mirror stood upright, not reflecting the forest but showing something else, a dim hallway lined with doors. As she stepped closer, her reflection turned its head independently and smiled with too many teeth. Startled, she backed away, but her feet touched something soft, a bed of moss shaped perfectly like a human outline. It was still warm. That night, she tried to find her way back but the path shifted with each step. The trees seemed to rearrange themselves. She walked in circles, passing the same hollow tree every hour. Each time she passed it, more symbols appeared carved into its bark, and her name among them. She finally made camp, though the ground was too cold, the stars too low. At midnight, laughter echoed through the trees, high-pitched and childlike. When she opened her eyes, children stood at the edge of the clearing, barefoot, pale, eyes glowing faintly. They didn't move, just watched. One held out its hand, and in its palm lay Clara's house keys, which she had lost years ago. She didn't ask how. She just ran. But the forest had closed. Every tree now had her face etched into its bark. The mirror in the clearing cracked, and a voice behind it whispered, "Come see what you left behind." When she finally stepped through it, the forest vanished. She was back in her bedroom. But the mirror now hung on her wall. It never reflected her again, only the trees. Liam was a skeptic, a freelance videographer known for debunking ghost sightings and haunted locations. His latest assignment led him to the Marrowbone Lighthouse, a black stone tower that hadn't operated in decades and was rumored to drive its keepers mad. He arrived at dusk, drone in hand, camera strapped to his chest, prepared to record another batch of evidence to dismantle. The locals warned him not to stay the night. He laughed. The door creaked open without a key. The staircase spiraled endlessly upward, its steps slick with brine and ash. The walls were lined with carvings, hundreds of eyes, all open, all staring. Liam dismissed them as sailor superstition. He set up his equipment in the keeper's quarters, a room thick with salt and rot, where a journal lay open beside a cracked oil lamp. Its pages were filled with a single sentence repeated endlessly: "It turns when no one watches." That night, he recorded everything. The lighthouse was dead silent, save for the occasional lap of unseen waves. But when he reviewed his footage, he noticed something off. In every clip, there was one frame, always one, where a figure stood at the edge of the lens. Thin. Drenched. Smiling. He checked the room. Empty. He deleted the footage, but the frames remained. Burned into his screen. At midnight, the light at the top of the tower flickered on, even though the mechanism had rusted shut. Compelled by something deeper than curiosity, Liam climbed the stairs. Each step echoed too long. The room at the top was circular, filled with mirrors and lenses, all pointed inward. In the center stood the original lens housing, shattered, and inside it, a heartbeat. He reached out to touch it and was pulled inside the reflection. He found himself in a room identical to the one he had left, but in reverse. The windows showed nothing. Just black. The light turned, but not mechanically. It turned like a head searching a room. He saw himself in the reflection again, only, that version was smiling. Recording. The journals were different here. They read, "You are the keeper now." He screamed, but no sound came out. His reflection raised a hand and waved. Liam blinked, and now he was back. But something had changed. His footage no longer showed the lighthouse. It showed him, sleeping. Or something that looked like him. And every time he tried to leave, he ended up at the top of the stairs again. The light never stopped turning. Julian always loved second-hand bookstores, the smell, the silence, the sense that forgotten things still breathed between the pages. He found Morrow and Dusk on a rainy afternoon, tucked between two buildings that didn't seem large enough to contain anything. The bell above the door didn't ring when he entered. The air inside was still and heavy, like a room that hadn't been opened in years. Rows of towering shelves stretched impossibly high, vanishing into darkness above. A pale man with clouded eyes nodded from behind the counter. First time. Julian nodded. "It'll find you," the man said, and turned away. He wandered, brushing spines, some of which flinched at his touch. The books had no titles. Only symbols burned into leather, some familiar, most not. In the back, he found a single black book sitting alone on a pedestal. The symbol on its cover resembled an open mouth. When he opened it, the pages were blank. But the longer he stared, the more they filled. First with ink, then with sketches, then moving images, and finally words. It was telling him a story. His story. Everything he had done, was doing, and, horrifyingly, what he hadn't done yet. Pages turned themselves, showing events that hadn't happened. A woman he hadn't met. A scream he hadn't made. A date, October 18th. The book snapped shut. Julian backed away, but the pedestal had vanished. The shelves around him were rearranged. The exit was gone. The only path led forward, deeper. He walked, heartbeat echoing too loudly. The books now whispered as he passed. Not in English. Not in anything he knew. One fell at his feet. Its cover bore his face, eyes missing. He opened it and saw himself sleeping. Then waking. Then standing in this exact moment. Then being watched. Then hunted. He dropped it and ran. But the shelves bent and moved, directing his path. He burst into a room lit by flickering candlelight. The pale man stood there, holding Julian's black book. "It's written now," he said softly. "You can't unread your ending." Julian begged to leave. The man opened the book. "You already did." With a snap, Julian's name burned across the final page. The flame spread, and the world folded into paper and ink. Now he's just another volume, sitting on the highest shelf. Occasionally, someone hears whispering from that book. It tells them their future. And then it writes a new ending. Marla took the night shift at the old museum for extra cash. It wasn't much, just watching dusty halls full of forgotten relics and occasionally logging the odd creak or flickering light. The building had been closed to the public for years, yet the lights still worked, and the exhibits were perfectly maintained. She was told to avoid the east wing. Under renovation, they said. But the doors weren't locked. On her third shift, the cameras glitched every hour, always at 3:33 a.m., leaving 3 minutes of static. Marla logged it as routine interference, but the silence during those minutes felt heavy, like something was waiting. Curious, she ventured toward the east wing one night, flashlight flickering. The exhibits there were wrong. No plaques, no signs, just shadowed displays behind glass. One held a dress, floating upright, stained with what looked like ink. Another displayed a violin strung with something too fine to be metal. In the center of the room stood a mirror, covered in a shroud of velvet. It pulsed slightly, as if something behind it was breathing. Her walkie crackled, "Do not approach the mirror." The voice wasn't from security. It sounded like hers. Startled, she pulled the cloth aside. The mirror didn't show her reflection. It showed the museum, but older. Rotting. Ash on the floors. A figure stood in the distance, unmoving. Every night after that, the mirror was uncovered. She tried covering it again, but the cloth was always found on the floor by morning. Soon, the figure in the mirror stood closer. She stopped checking. But the rest of the museum changed. Display items began to rearrange themselves. One night, she found her name etched beneath a pair of shoes in a glass case. Another night, she saw a wax figure of herself appear in a corner, eyes closed, breathing shallow. No one else saw it. Cameras never picked it up. On her last shift, the museum alarms triggered. Every door locked. Her walkie buzzed again, exit denied. Exhibit complete. She ran to the lobby, but the world outside had frozen in grayscale. The mirror now reflected her exact surroundings, except her reflection stared back, smiling. It lifted a hand. So did she. It raised a knife. Her hand stayed still. The glass cracked. Something stepped through. Now, during the 3:33 a.m. blackout, visitors sometimes glimpse a new exhibit in the East Wing, a woman frozen mid-scream inside the mirror. And if you watch long enough, she moves. Theo inherited the motel from his uncle, a crumbling roadside inn off a long-forgotten highway. The sign flickered, vacancy, even when no one was there, and half the rooms hadn't been used in decades. But the paperwork was clean, and the price was free. He figured he'd renovate, turn it into a quirky weekend retreat. The locals avoided it. They crossed the street when they passed it. "That place doesn't let go," one whispered. Theo shrugged it off. The first night, he stayed in room 3. The air smelled faintly of burnt sugar and rust. The wallpaper peeled in patterns that looked like faces. He heard knocking from the next room all night, rhythmic and patient. Room 4 was empty. He dismissed it. Old buildings creaked. The second night, the knocking moved, room 2 this time. Then room 5. It circled. The pattern never changed, knock knock knock, pause, knock. He tried recording it, but the camera only captured silence and static. At 3:33 a.m. The lights always flickered once, then steadied, no matter what he did to the wiring. The power box had no faults. The third night, he checked every room. All were empty. Yet when he returned to the lobby, the guest book had a new name in looping black ink, Mrs. Bellamy, room 6. There was no room 6. He ran outside to get air and found that the road behind the motel had vanished. The highway now curved endlessly into fog. His phone had no signal. Every app blinked and froze. Only the camera worked, but it showed timestamps from 10 years ago. When he checked room 6, it was suddenly there, where a linen closet had been. The door was slightly ajar. Inside, the air was ice. A rocking chair moved on its own. A figure sat in shadow. "I missed my wake-up call," she whispered. Her skin was gray, papery. Eyes like smeared ink. Theo backed out and slammed the door, only to find the hallway changed, longer, with more doors. Each bore a name from the guest book. Names he hadn't seen before. Names that hadn't arrived. That night, he dreamed of rooms swallowing people whole, of clocks running backward, of keys melting into bone. He woke to find a key in his palm labeled Room Infinity. There was no such room. And yet the key fit a door that hadn't existed the day before. Behind it was a hallway lined with mirrors, each showing a different version of him, older, scarred, insane, gone. One mirror was empty. Its surface rippled. He turned away. The door was gone. The motel doesn't let go. He still checks out guests. You can even book a room, if you can find it. But once you stay the night, your name's in the book forever. Clara worked the late shift at the city library, a massive, Gothic building that stretched 4 stories high and ran deeper underground than most knew. On paper, it closed at 9 p.m., but Clara's job included archival management, which meant she stayed until midnight cataloging books no one remembered ordering. Floor B3 was her domain, dusty, unlit except for flickering motion lights, and quiet in a way that pressed against the ears. One night, while logging a new delivery, she noticed a slim volume without a barcode. Its cover was cracked leather, unmarked except for a single symbol, an eye with 7 lashes. She opened it. The pages were blank, but her name appeared on the first one in thick black ink as soon as she touched it. She dropped it and backed away. The lights went out. In the dark, she heard pages turning, fast, like fingers were flipping through them with purpose. When the lights returned, the book was closed again, sitting neatly on the shelf. She locked the archives and left early. But the next day, the book was on her desk. Still blank. Still humming faintly with a heat that didn't match the cold, dry air. She burned it in the courtyard incinerator. Watched it turn to ash. That night, it was on her pillow. Page 1, Clara Brooks enters the archive at 11:47 p.m. Page 2, she does not leave. When she returned to the basement, the halls were longer. The walls seemed to breathe. Books rearranged themselves while her back was turned. Every staircase led to the same door. Her phone showed the date as 13/13/13. At the end of the hall, a shadow waited. Not a person, but the idea of one. She couldn't see a face. It whispered, "Finish the book." Her legs moved on their own. She sat at the table. The pen was already in her hand. The pages filled with words she didn't remember writing. Clara sat as the ink poured through her fingers. And her fingers bled ink. She screamed, but the sound didn't leave her mouth. The book absorbed it. On the final page, she lived forever in the library of the unwritten, where authors are their own stories. In the real world, the library reopens daily. But the elevator skips B3 now. If you ask about Clara, no one recalls her. But late at night, if you press your ear to the floor in the non-fiction section, you might hear someone whispering prose. If you check the return bin before dawn, sometimes a leather-bound book appears, warm to the touch, blank inside, until you touch it. And then your story begins.